Welcome to Invest in Yourself, the Digital Entrepreneur Podcast. Join the podcast mogul Phil Better as he interviews successful entrepreneurs that make their living in the digital world. Now, let's join your host, Phil Better, and his special guest today on Invest in Yourself, the Digital Entrepreneur Podcast.
Oh, why is this going on? There we go. Welcome back to Invest in Yourself, the Digital Entrepreneur Podcast. I am, of course, your host with the most, Phil Better. There was probably a huge gap of audio that's missing because my computer decided to be slow. So welcome back to the episode. I am very happy to have someone who's been in the podcasting game probably longer than I have, has built two amazing podcasts, helps podcasters automate, do a whole bunch of stuff. And I was a guest on his podcast, How I Built This. Please put your hands together for Joe Casabona. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's good to talk to you again, Phil.
Yes, it's been like, 30 minutes since we last chatted?
Something like that, yeah. I had a nice lunch.
You did? What did you have? What was your lunch that you had after our conversation?
I'm trying to do like the aggressively low carb thing because I have type 2 diabetes. So I had a little egg wrap. We've got these low carb wraps, and so I had a egg and mozzarella cheese wrap, and it was delicious.
That sounds delicious. I'm a little jealous. I had a bowl of cereal. That was my my lunch / breakfast.
Now I'm jealous because I love cereal.
Wait, I had Honey Nut Cheerios. That's my favorite cereal. So is that your favorite cereal?
Ooh, favorite cereal. I think for me it's Frosted Mini Wheats, which as far as low carb goes, that's terrible.
Yeah, it's nowhere near the low carb that you need. So Joe, you've been a podcaster for about 10 years now, or probably over 10 plus years.
Yeah.
What got you started in podcasting?
From the listening standpoint, I started listening to podcasts because I was having a discussion with friends who all seemed to know more than me about a wide range of topics. I have my master's in software engineering, and so I knew a lot about computers, but we're talking about like physics and current events and whatever. And I thought, how do you guys know so much? And they're like, oh, we listen to these podcasts. And I was like, oh man, I'm subscribed to podcasts. I don't listen to any of them. So I actually started listening to them. And then I started podcasting in 2012. I feel like my podcast started the way every podcast around that time started, with me and a few friends talking about stuff that we didn't really know about. And I thought, hey, we should record this and make this a podcast. And we did that, and it was terrible. It was called TIL Podcast for Today I Learned. But then for about 4 years after that, I decided to actually start a real podcast. And I did that because I was teaching at the college level at the time, and I was moving away. We got married. We're moving away from the college I taught at. And I still wanted to put educational material out there in the world. And I thought having a podcast was a really great vehicle for that. I learn a lot of stuff from podcasts, and it would be great to be able to teach people via podcasts.
I like that. So your first podcast, obviously Today I Learned, still with the learning theme. You learned something from people, and then you flipped it and decided to teach people about something. And what was it, the Profitable Podcaster or How I Built This, that came from that wish? Like, which came first?
How I Built It came first, and it's because, this is silly, I called it that because I owned the domain howibuilt.it. I bought it while we were in Italy for our honeymoon, my wife and I, for our honeymoon. And I bought it with just no idea on how I'd use it. And then when I was getting ready to like launch my online courses, I was talking to a bunch of friends who launched their online courses about how they built their businesses. And I thought, hey, this is a good podcast idea and name, and let's roll with it. And so like I kind of fell in to that name, not the concept. Um, and then little chip on my shoulder time. About 3 months later, NPR released a podcast with a very similar name to mine. But since I was there first, I felt like I could keep the name, and well, they haven't come after me yet for it, so I'm sticking around with it.
Plus, you have the domain, so they can't come after you. You have precedent before them. I think you're fine there. And obviously, there's at least a dozen podcasts just with Grow Your Show.
Right.
Just that alone, or Grow Your Podcast. There's like about a dozen iterations of that. And as long as you keep doing it longer than them, it's yours. That's what I think. But you then decided. When did you decide to do the profitable podcaster?
Yeah, so around 2018. So I should say that how I built it took off pretty quickly. I reached like 100,000 downloads in 9 months, which I thought was really good. It was sponsored, like long-term sponsorship, probably because it fell into a really good niche, right? I was talking to WordPress developers about how they built their WordPress development businesses. And so WordPress businesses contacted me to sponsor the show. And so a lot of people started asking me like, hey, how did you get so many downloads so quickly? Hey, how is your show sponsored? Like you're making like real money off of your podcast. And then at a business conference called Cabo Press, it's a business conference in Cabo. Amazing. Right.
Who would have thought, right? Who would have thought?
Know. It's like a pretty tight knit like mastermind sort of situation. But I was encouraged then to start offering some sort of podcast services. So at first we called it Podcast in a Box, where I would be like your all-in-one podcast producer and host. I learned pretty quickly that doesn't scale very well at all, because if I am the host, there's only a certain amount of hours in the day. And so then I decided to pivot to online courses and coaching and things like that. And when I really decided to go all in on podcasting, leave the WordPress world behind, I launched the Profitable Podcaster as a way to establish authority and create content and generate leads for my business and my coaching program.
I like that. And that is a great thing, how you're using your podcast as your lead gen for your business. And it's also amplifying your authority because it's showing what you're talking about. You're in the grind day to day. And I love how a lot more podcasters and a lot more business people are using that podcast to build that authority. So how do you do it for lead gen with the Profitable Podcaster? Do you bring guests onto it and get them that way, or do you use your content to bring people into your business?
I use the content to bring people into my business. So I'm actually working on a webinar. I don't know. I'm not sure. Based on what we've talked about previously, I think the webinar will be over by the
More than
time
likely.
this episode comes out. But I'm working on a webinar. I mean, it'll happen again, like on a cycle, but about repurposing content for your podcast. And so I have a little content flywheel, right, where I start on LinkedIn with a LinkedIn post, and then those posts serve as the outline for my podcast episodes. And so each week it's a mini podcast. It's just me, 15 minutes or less. Well, let's say 20 minutes or less. Sometimes I get a little rambly.
Don't we all?
Yeah. Talking about some important topic to help. At first it was pretty untargeted. It was like it was called Make Money Podcasting, and it was just like anybody who wants to make money. And now it's coaches, course creators, and authors who want to build their authority with their podcast. And so it's podcasting tips, lead generation, things like that. And then that eventually turns into a newsletter and a blog post. So that's my little content flywheel. And really important at the beginning, I have a call to action for my mailing list with I call it the Podcast Booster Blueprint. It's how to get more downloads in 30 days.
Ooh, that vanity matrix of downloads, but it's so important because apparently sponsors want to know how many downloads you get. I want to go to the monetizing the profitable not how I built it. I know we're jumping kind of like between the shows, and I hope you don't mind, but you secured a long-term sponsor, and was the sponsorship they came to you to sponsor your show, or did you outreach to them?
Yeah, they came to me, which was the most wild thing. So I should say like how I built it was sponsored before episode 1, because somebody emailed me about like a link back, and I like flippantly responded, oh, I don't do that, but for $99 you can sponsor the first episode of my podcast, which is the same audience. And he was like, yeah. And I was like, what?
Oh my God.
And so like I did these little like one-off things, reach out to like maybe brands that were mentioned in the episode, in the interview. Hey, like, do you want to? And so I had sponsors like pretty regularly. Like Hover was one of my first sponsors. But about a year into the podcast, I left my full-time job. This was June 2017. I got married in June 2016, and our daughter was born in March 2017. I'll let y'all do the math on that. So I left my full-time job with a wife on unpaid maternity and a 3-month-old at home. And I did not have the pipeline I thought I did. So I'm like freaking out. And then like by the grace of God, this company Pantheon reached out to me and said, hey, we love what you're doing with the podcast. We want to sponsor it long term. And I said, okay, why don't we do like $10,000 for 6 months? And they said, okay. And I thought, what?
Wait, what?
Yeah. And so I thought, well, I mean, if they're willing to, maybe other companies will too. And so I got a pretty full deck. And I think I made about $30,000, maybe $20,000 that year from podcast sponsorships. And now I make between 30 and 50 per year from podcast sponsorships.
And those are companies doing long-term deals with you, or those like sometimes short deal sponsorships?
I do a minimum. I require a minimum of 4 episodes, and here's why. First of all, it's like it's not really worth it for me to do the insertion for one time, but it's also really not worth it for them. Like, you probably know this. For someone to want to buy from you, you got to hear their message multiple times. Not everybody is going to listen to every episode. And so I personally try to push the 3-month sponsorship first. And if they're not keen on that, I say it's a minimum of 4 Like, you got to run for at least a month, or 2 months if you want to do every other week. But so it's a lot more of that right now as we record this. We're in or coming out of or going into economic uncertainty. One of those, but people are a little bit tighter with their ad budgets right now. So they're keen on like the short-term deals right now.
Yeah. No, I love you talking about this because it's great for podcasters to understand, like, having that like minimum is necessary. Just doing one-off episodes, like you said, it's not worth it. It's just, it doesn't pay the bills for anybody. But negotiating those longer terms, like for 4 episodes minimum or the 3 months, that allows you as a podcaster to have that like security, knowing, okay, at least the next couple episodes are the same sponsor and that. When you got that, like, you just picked a number out of your head with the first time sponsor, with that link back, you're like $99, and then you're like $10,000. You just randomly pick those numbers.
Kind of. $99 definitely just felt like a number. Okay, here's what I thought, right? $99 felt like a number that is worth it for a forever link, right? Like, if you go to howibultit.it/001, that link still works. So like, that person paid $99 almost 8 years ago, or 7 years ago, or whatever.
Now it's costing them $0.
Yeah, still on the site, right? Got at least 1 click last month because I went to see if it was still like an operational site, or if it didn't get like redirected to like porn or whatever. for the $10,000 number, and this is something that my friend Justin Moore teaches in his Brand Deal Wizard, but sponsorships are worth different things to different sponsors. And this sponsor was a big hosting company. They sponsored these things called WordCamps, right? So one of the other things is that I was really well positioned in my niche, and I knew the industry, and I was trusted in the industry. And I know that if you're sponsoring a big WordCamp, you're spending way more than $10,000 for a single day event. And so I thought $10,000 feels good for 6 months. They get, again, those forever links, and it's going to cost them less than it would to sponsor a WordCamp. And that's why they yesed it so quickly, right? A company of that size, at that time at least, had the discretion to just kind of say yes to a $10,000 sponsorship.
And so from that point, did you extrapolate how much each episode was worth, or you just said 6 months is $10K? That's the deal going forward.
Yeah, I made a little bit of a mistake here because I had seasons, and so I priced it based on season. Where a season was like January 5th to July 2nd or something like that. And then I would take like a month off, and then it'd be like August 1st to November 30th or whatever. And that's like weird and unclear to anybody who's looking to sponsor. But it was like really episode bundles, like 24 episodes is this. Now I do it based on months. So I say 3-month package, 6-month package, 12-month package, 12-month exclusive package based on availability. Spoiler alert, that one's not going to be available until like I think July or August, right? I have at least one sponsor per episode until then. So that's how I started doing it. And one of the other things I did for a while was make my prices public, because I thought, well, let's be open and honest about this. But again, sponsorships are worth different things to different people. And I've always included my other properties in the sponsorship, right? Because this is like something I teach. Like CPM doesn't work for smaller podcasts. I even though, like, according to like Listen Notes, I'm in the top 1.5% and I get like 70,000 downloads per month, I'm still a small podcast, right? It's like the millions and millions of downloads per episode is what.
Yeah, they're looking for the top 1% of the 1%.
Right. And so at around 5,000 downloads per episode in the first 30 days, that CPM is not going to mean much to me, right? It's not an appreciable amount of money. And so even like generously, it's probably like $125, right? I charge around $300 per sponsor per episode. And because of that, I like to calculate my overall reach, right? So I include my newsletter, I include my YouTube channel, I include my social media following, and I build packages based on that. So if someone's keen on having a video that the sponsorship points to, I can do that for them too. And that's going to cost more money. And so now I'm really keen on putting together these custom packages where the podcast sponsorship is kind of the centerpiece, but there's all this auxiliary stuff too.
You're adding to the value ladder. You're not only getting an episode, like they can sponsor an episode if they want, but if you go to this package, you're getting, hey, I'm going to do a social media post, a YouTube clip, and something else added on. So that makes it more worthwhile. So they're like, oh, I'm getting more bang for my buck.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And sometimes people will come to me and be like, hey, I saw your video on this. I would love if you did a video for us. And I say, okay, that's great. Like the video is this price, right? Whatever, $125 or $200 per finished minute. Or, we can add a lot more value to this because my podcast audience is way bigger than my YouTube audience. So what if I make this video for you? I include it in my newsletter. I do a sponsor spot. I mention the video in the sponsor spot. And now we're getting more traffic to that YouTube video. Maybe YouTube recommends it more. All the while you're getting in front of my biggest audience on the podcast.
There we go. Oh, I love that. And plus you have like the 30, 40, 50 downloads, 50,000 downloads, I should say, a month. And that's just like extra gravy because like, oh, and like stats have shown that people who listen to podcasts are more likely to purchase something they hear on a podcast. So like, oh, genius with the added value, because most marketers know how powerful the other platforms are. They just don't understand podcasting because it's quote unquote new and unregulated.
Right. But you better believe, like, Sounds Profitable just released the Medium Moves the Message study. Well, as this comes out a couple of months ago now. But it like straight up shows podcast audiences are the most primed to buy. They trust the most. And so your ads will probably perform better given the right alignment, right? And Sounds Profitable does really good work.
Oh, I'm glad you brought them up, because they're one of the few emails on podcasting that's talking about the industry as a whole. And it's not just like, oh, we interviewed this person, because I know that's linked to a podcaster, I think. I don't think are they a company, or are they
Sounds Profitable?
Yeah.
They're like an actual company now. It was started by Brian Barletta, but he brought on Tom Webster, a research mogul. I guess I just said mogul because I see it.
You're talking to the podcast mogul as it is.
Research expert and longtime researcher over at Edison Research. Left a couple years ago to go to Sounds Profitable, and now they're doing all sorts of studies. I know Ari Nissenblatt is also heavily involved. I think she's from Squadcast. Yeah, Squadcast. But she's heavily involved over there. And yeah, they do such great work. The episode that came out today that I'm really excited to listen to is called RIP Baked In Ads, which is real interesting because all of my ads are baked in.
Yeah, I prefer baked in ads because I like to use affiliate links. Like if you're going to be sponsoring my podcast, I know that I'm going to continue on. And if you stop after 6 months, let's say we do a 6-month contract, 6 months later, baked in ads are still going to be there, because I like that baked in, because I know it takes 6 months before someone can listen to an audience. From listening to Tom Hunt about what he's done with B2B marketing and fame, and that he's shown that, hey, it takes 6 months that you'll start growing the traction with your podcast. So having that affiliate link will give the podcaster more bang for his buck. He's going to promote it more or they will, I shouldn't use the masculine, but they will promote it more, because I can come back. If I have an affiliate link that's going to make me money, I'm going to talk about it every once in a while in my newsletter and that. So do you use the affiliate links as well, or do you not?
I use affiliate links sometimes. Yeah. When it makes sense, usually in the show notes, or if I'm like, and I do it more on the Profitable Podcaster because I made a decision to not have that sponsored, because I'm using it to establish my authority, and I really want like one call to action there, and it's to join my mailing list, right? With how I built it, I have the call to join my membership. I've got the 3 baked in ads over there. And so, if I have affiliate links, they'll be in the transcripts, they'll be in the show notes. They usually won't be something I explicitly say on air. And I know like that's the best way to like leverage affiliate links in your podcast.
Where do you want your podcast to go? The Profitable Podcast. Where do you hope to see it in like 5 years?
Ooh, in 5 years, that's really a good question. It's interesting, right? Because right now I'm talking to people about how to podcast well, how to be a profitable podcaster. In 5 years, if I'm growing hopefully with my audience, maybe I do talk more about industry news. Maybe I do more live coaching calls which is a format I'm toying with, right? Where every 5 or 6 episodes, it's somebody who has a coaching call with me for free for 20 minutes, and we talk about their biggest problem. The idea there, right, is that people are getting a sample of my coaching style.
Yes.
So maybe 5 years into the future, it's probably a video podcast, right? It's probably talking about how the industry is changing and how to leverage YouTube's monetization for your podcast, though hopefully before 5 years. And it'll be talking about, Gen Z will be really entering the workforce at that time. So I suspect listening habits will change considerably. And that's probably the kind of stuff I'll be covering on the Profitable Podcaster 5 years from now.
I love how you brought up Gen Z because they are the biggest consumer of podcasts. And if you're not in their space where they are and understanding how their minds work, you're losing out on a huge potential future growth, specifically when it comes to monetization. They may not have the capital now, but they're learning so much better skills than the millennials and the Gen Xers and the boomers had beforehand, where we were forced to sell our time to make capital, where they're learning how to leverage their knowledge to make capital. So I love that you're understanding them and you're directly going after, not directly pointing to them, but knowing that they are the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I got to speak at my high school a few weeks ago for their career day, and I took as a podcast coach, so like that was an interesting topic to them. And I took the opportunity to learn a little bit about their listening habits as well. And so this is not obviously a statistically significant sample size. It was about 70 kids throughout the day, but they all exclusively used Spotify. I thought that was interesting. When I asked them to name shows they like to listen to, the only show they could name was the Joe Rogan Experience. They talked about topics instead. Oh, well, I'm really into true crime. Oh, I'm really into like medical stuff. I'm really into sports. And what I was able to figure out and then ask them explicitly was, oh, so you don't subscribe to podcasts. You just let Spotify recommend episodes to you. And they said, yeah, with this kind of incredulity that like made me think, am I podcasting right? Like it was like, yeah, how else would you do it? Find a show and subscribe to it. None of them knew what RSS was. So like it's the listening habit is really interesting, and Spotify's new interface, the vertical scroll interface that gives you a minute preview of the show, going to be even more important in the next year or so, right? Because this is how people on Spotify, anywhere from 20 to 30%, depending on the stats you're looking at, that's how they consume podcasts.
Ooh, I love that. And I completely forgot that Spotify is coming with this, the vertical scroll with their podcast. And that's super important to understand. Like that first 15 seconds, that hook point that you have in that episode is where you get them. Like if you just start cold without any hook points, you're going to end up losing so many people in the future because of the innovations that are coming and people's, like I said on your podcast, which by the time I'm going to make sure that these are released right around the same time. So after we're done, you need to let me know when you're hypothetically releasing it so I can release this at the same time. But if you go back to the episode that we did on your show on how I built this, we discuss on, I just lost what I was, we discuss about the future and what's coming with podcasting. And it was a great conversation, but I want to know, where do you see podcasting going?
I think, as we discussed, like YouTube is going to be such a bigger player. And so I think that discoverability will get better. I think there will be more or maybe better opportunities for podcasters to monetize, but we shouldn't fall into the trap of thinking like YouTube is going to make podcasters rich, because YouTube has only made a handful of people, relatively speaking, rich.
Yeah.
I think that again, as the younger generation becomes the main content consumers, they'll want their content recommended to them and kind of more on demand. Whereas, you and I, we hear about a podcast from somebody we like and we go and we subscribe in our favorite app. For me, it's Overcast. Though I will say, like, the Overcast Apple Watch app isn't very good. But for them, it's going to be like whatever Spotify or YouTube throws at me, I'll check it out. And if I'm not interested in the first 60 seconds, I'm moving on, because guess what? They have like hundreds of recommendations lined up for me. So I think from a consumer standpoint, it's going to be a lot more competitive. From the creator standpoint, from the podcaster standpoint, Understanding that you need to really niche down is going to be important because your audience needs to feel like you're talking directly to them, and understanding that titles, descriptions, artwork, and that first 60 seconds are going to be as important for podcasting as they are to YouTube videos today.
Great. That is so true. Like I love that you brought that up because it is important that if your podcast, you have to think of your podcast like a TV show, a radio show, because that's what this medium is moving into. And YouTube is telling you exactly, like YouTube just released a like how to pretty much use YouTube for your podcast to grow your podcast and all that. Like they literally break it down to, you know, if you follow those steps, you'll be ahead of 90% of the podcasters, because most podcasters on YouTube aren't following those steps. So I'm so glad you brought up the thumbnail, the 90 seconds, the content, and niching down. Niching down is so important. Yes, you can be a general podcast if you want, but it's going to take you longer to get to the level you want. Whereas if you're niched in specifically teaching people how to build something, how do these super successful people build their business, that is a great podcast, you know, or the profitable podcast. I'm going to tell you how to monetize your podcast. These are the steps you need to take. Those are going to be more and more important moving forward, because that's what people want. They want that knowledge so that they can get to the next level. And you're positioned already. Sorry about that. We're coming to the end of the episode. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that. Building under construction. Gotta live with that. So we're coming to the end of the episode. I want to get this Spark question done by Seek Discomfort. If you're a fan of Seek Discomfort, they're an amazing organization. You should go check out their YouTube channel. There's a link down below. Is there someone who's had a big impact on your life and doesn't know it?
Wow. Is there someone who's had a big impact on my life and doesn't know it? I guess this is an open-ended question, but I don't want to name somebody I don't know personally.
It's fine. If you don't know them, but they helped you. Like I can say Tim Ferriss because he's helped me dramatically with the 4-hour work week and some of his papers. So unknown people are fine as well. But anybody you would like to say?
Gosh, well, I guess my my pinstripe pride is going to show here. I'm a huge Yankee fan, born and raised in New York, and I just think Aaron Judge is someone who has really had an impact on my life in the last couple of years. Because yeah, he's a great ball player. Yeah, he holds the undisputed MLB home run record, you know, no asterisks for steroids or anything like that. But his leadership and his demeanor are really something to be admired, because in an era of really sports celebrity where everyone is trying to show off on social media and show off this life that they're leading that maybe is empty, but they want people to think they're cool. Aaron Judge just puts his head down, does the work, and is always really cordial, keeps the private things private, and praises his teammates above all else. It's true leadership in an era where true leaders are hard to come by.
So great. So great. I like it. And yeah, it's fine. You can, that pinstripe pride. I don't have a team because they moved away from us, but
moved away and then had the indecency to win a World Series.
Yeah. Yeah, we had to have a strike when we were on our way to win the World Series, and they had the indecency to go win one. Yeah. Not even long after they left us. The indecency. But Joe, I'm going to jump off screen here. I want you to let my audience know where they can follow you, where they can find the Profitable Podcast, or how you built it, or anything specifically you'd like them to know. So the floor, sir, is yours.
Thank you so much, Phil. This has been a blast. I love talking podcasting. If you want to learn more about me, I have set up a landing page specifically for listeners over at podcastliftoff.com/Phil. podcastliftoff.com/Phil. It'll have the links to all of my podcasts, some resources, and a free download for you, which is my podcast planner, automations, and all of that built in.
I love that. I just love what you did there with that. And I keep telling podcasters they need to have that when they guest on another podcast, have a dedicated landing site to send people to. So I'm glad that you're re-entering that. I'm just going to clip that and share it because it's so important. So Joe, thank you very much for dropping more wisdom than I ever thought possible on an episode. It was incredible talking with you this time and on your show, How I Built This.
My pleasure, Phil. Thanks so much. I'm glad we were able to do this podcast swap.
Oh, very, very happy. To my audience, you know what to do. Check out the show notes down below. Head over to the link that Joe said. I just completely forgot it, but it's going to be in the show notes. I can guarantee you it will be in the show notes. Go ahead and get that stuff if you're looking to start your podcast or even need some help with your podcast. I'm going to go over and check it because why not? So Joe, thank you again for that wisdom. Thank you to my audience. You guys know what you have to do. Remember to always invest in yourself.